What's up guys, thanks for stopping by, I hope you're doing good. Today's video is going to be all about keybinds in PUBG. Thanks for tuning in, let's jump into it. So first of all, for weapon slot 1 and weapon slot 2 in the inventory, I actually have mouse wheel scroll down for 1, mouse wheel scroll up for slot 2. So as you can see here in the menu, I actually don't use the next weapon or the previous weapon keybind. I just have scroll down as 1 and scroll up as 2, and so I never accidentally switch to the wrong gun. These specific keybinds to do with changing weapons pair perfectly with this setting here in the menu that I really like, which is under gameplay, and that is the weapon slot HUD. I really like being able to see what slot a weapon is on the HUD rather than having to guess by cycling or check my inventory. So as you can see in the bottom right, with this enabled, I can see that in slot 1 is my mini. So that means if I scroll down, my mini is there, and if I scroll up, my M4 is there. So another detail I really love about this keybind is just knowing that the lower slot is actually scroll down and the upper slot is actually scroll up. This setting alone just allows me to visualize that a little bit and just know for sure that if I'm on the M4, for example, I go down for the one below, and if I'm on the mini, for example, I go up for the one above. It just allows me to visualize so that if I ever do switch the weapon slot, I can actually see that, okay, now it's actually up for the mini. Again, this is all just to avoid switching to the wrong item or wrong weapon. I personally find this keybind really useful. I find that it really enables me to switch guns way faster than having to stretch my number keys. And one of the main reasons I actually love this keybind is that I can be strafing around, or I can, for example, just be running straight forwards and never take my fingers off WASD to change gun. Whereas if you have it on number key 1 and number key 2, you would have to take your fingers off WASD or at least stretch a finger. So I find this just gives me a little bit more freedom to move exactly how I want whilst also changing weapons. I also personally find that by doing this, I'm not using the next weapon and previous weapon keybind to just keep scrolling through everything equipped. It means I never accidentally cycle to the wrong weapon or the wrong slot. Okay, so bearing in mind that I have the weapon slot HUD on, I can actually see that my sidearm is in slot 3, so therefore I have that on 3. By the way, you should totally be using the R45 now. After the new patch, it's a super fun gun that just got a big buff. I can see that my melee weapon, which is my pan in this case, is number 4, so I have that on slot 4. I can see that my grenade is on slot 5, so I have that on number 5. And then of course, this is something that maybe not everybody knows, but if you just keep pressing number 5 or whatever slot you happen to have your throwables mapped to, keeping pressing it will actually cycle through. And for me, I can see just next to the mini map there what it is I'm switching to just by looking at the icon. I also have cycle fire mode between single burst and full auto bound to 2. Because I don't have 2 as the second weapon slot, it frees up this key for other things, and I use it to change firing mode. The reason I actually have changed fire mode bound to this is actually because I want this specific keybind for changing fire mode to be on a key that is almost impossible to press by accident. This is something that's going to come up multiple times throughout this video. There are certain keybinds that if pressed accidentally could actually cause you to die, whether it's by changing to a different gun or a different item, or being on single when you thought you was on full auto, or bringing up the inventory or a map in the middle of a fight, or making your own ADS. There's a ton of things you can do in PUBG that if done accidentally could cause you to lose a fight, and I will try and cover all of them in this video, but one of them is changing fire mode. And I just find by having fire mode bound to 2, I never press this by accident. But again, this could really be bound to anything that just isn't near other keys you use often. Okay, so here is another super important keybind that I highly recommend everybody uses, which is crouch on C, but not just the keybind itself. I also highly recommend that people have crouch set to hold. The reason for this is that during a fight, spamming crouch can be a really good way to avoid being shot. And if you have this on toggle, you're literally going to have to press the C key twice as many times to bounce up and down and avoid being shot in the head. But if you have it on hold, you literally just have to keep pressing C and you're just gonna crouch and then stand up instantaneously. And this is a really good thing to get in the habit of doing during fights. That being said, I also have prone bound to X, which is right next to C, and this allows me to more quickly do a drop shot when necessary, because I'm most likely going to be pressing crouch to spray or crouch to dodge or something anyway. And then if it's a good time to say flick on somebody who's on my left that I didn't notice, I already have the reflex and muscle memory to sort of turn, lean, crouch. But if he catches me off guard and I want to do a drop shot, now I just have to sort of roll my thumb onto the X key, which is right next to crouch, to do a drop shot. In fact, sometimes when I'm drop shotting, say I'm fighting somebody, I'm using my fingers on WASD and my thumb on crouch. This is how I'm going to be doing most of my fighting in PUBG. Or if they need to quickly do a drop shot, which ideally is a drop shot, you want to crouch and then prone, I will actually be holding crouch with my thumb and then I will tap prone with my index finger, so like this. But this keybind specifically makes it easier for me to quickly prone because my thumb is almost always on C anyway, and it also allows me to quickly drop shot by holding C and then tapping X. Just like how I mentioned, there are certain keybinds that I want to sort of move away for where I'm usually going to have my hands because I don't want to accidentally press them, like I mentioned with change fire mode. There are other keybinds that I want to be able to press quickly, and those keybinds I try and keep close together, and so that's another reason why I have crouch and prone where they are. The next keybind I have in this area is the Unarm button. I have Unarm bound to Z, which I really like because I can press it with my ring finger, and this means that I can use my little finger for sprint. I can still use my thumb to spam crouch or spacebar. I can still be pressing W with my middle finger. I can still have index to press F to pick up an item whilst running, and all the time be able to use my ring finger to arm or unarm when wanting to move fast whilst looting or flanking or something like that. And most of the time when I'm doing this, I'm actually just using the mouse to change my direction. For the aim keybind, or the TPP aim, whatever you want to call it, I have that bound to mouse 4, which could be different on your mouse, but for me it is the mouse button that would be used to go back in your web browser when browsing the internet. This is a super important keybind for close quarters engagements. I'm able to go from ADSing to instantly aiming. It's really useful if someone is actually really close. You might not want to ADS. And then mouse 5, which is the button used to go forward in your web browser, is to toggle the canted sight. I personally do not want any keybind on my mouse that could cause me to lose a fight in some way. This has actually caused me to unbind the TPP aim button a few times because depending on how your mouse layout is, you might be able to press this by accident and cause you to un-ADS, which is not great. But on my mouse 4 is well out the way of my thumb, and the trade-off of keeping this out of the way versus having it being easily accessible during a fight is worth it to me. This is just a button I actually do use all the time, and the most effective way to use this feature is in such a way that you have immediate access to it. So to me, the risk of pressing this by accident is totally worth it. And like I said, this is going to be totally dependent on your personal mouse design, but if mouse 4 and 5 for you sits above where you have your thumb on your mouse, then I would say it should be totally fine for you to use mouse 4 for TPP aim like I do. But if your thumb is sitting right on mouse 4 and 5, I would probably avoid really using mouse 4 and 5 for anything that causes you to un-ADS. So when it comes to keybinds on the mouse, to zoom in and out, I actually use left alt and mouse wheel down to zoom out, and left alt and mouse wheel up to zoom in. This is because I have mouse wheel down and up to change weapons between slot 1 and 2. So it means I can't just use the mouse wheel. It'll just cause me to change weapon. But just by having left alt and mouse wheel, it solves this issue for me. Zooming in and out on the map also causes me to change weapon. This could be annoying for some players, so this could be a reason why they don't want to use the mouse wheel to change weapons, but I'm really used to it and personally don't find it to be an issue. I also use left, alt, and mouse 4 and 5 to increase and decrease the zeroing distance of the 8x scope. This is so I can just be completely ADS and leaning and stuff and still change zeroing distance. Mouse 5 and left alt is zeroing distance up, and mouse 4 and left out is zeroing distance down. This is something that you don't have to use very often, and so I find it okay to have a more obscure keybind. Also, this is one of those features that I don't really like being able to do by accident, because if you change the zeroing distance, it can really mess with your aim if you don't realize it's not set to 100 meters. And so therefore, I really like this keybind being a key combination because it completely rules out accidentally changing your zeroing distance, and it is something that only really applies to the 8x or the 15x, and so it being a rare thing that you need to do just makes me comfortable with using a slightly more unusual keybind. Okay, the next set of important keybinds are all to do with seat swapping. I have the driver's seat bound to Shift W. I will demonstrate why in a second. I have seat 2 set to Q and seat 3 set to E. The Q and E keybinds are typically only used to lean. You can't lean whilst in a vehicle, so that means the Q and E keys are actually completely free keybinds whilst you're in a vehicle. These 3 keybinds together make it really easy to seat swap for various situations when it's appropriate. For most of the seats in a vehicle though, I do still have the default keybinds, mostly because it's extremely rare that I find I need to be in any of these other seats from 4 onwards quickly. The main ones are switching to the passenger side, behind the driver, or the driver's seat. So when you're running around in PUBG, you're probably holding Shift W. This means, but also, oftentimes when you go to get in a vehicle in PUBG, you press F, and depending on where you had your mouse cursor, you might not end up in the driver's seat. By having Shift W bound to the driver's seat, it means that because my fingers are already in place, all I have to do to always end up in the driver's seat is be running up to a vehicle, spam F, and then spam W as I get in. It requires me to really quickly get in the driver's seat if I didn't instantly end up in the correct seat without having to move any fingers on the keyboard or stretch my hand at all to do some bizarre keybind. Normally, I use seat 3 on E for drive-bys and also the passenger seat on Q for drive-bys as well. And the reason I have these 2 seats bound specifically is because when doing a drive-by, it helps be on the opposite side of the vehicle to the enemy you're shooting. So if the enemy is on my right side, I press E. If the enemy is on my left side, I press Q. And that just means I always have the car in front of me as a little bit of cover when actually doing the drive-by. One last thing to know about the seat swap keybinds is that oftentimes when you're pulling up to a compound, you might want to quickly change seats to either be landing in a more advantageous position or just to be taking cover behind the vehicle. For example, if I was pulling up to this compound on the left here, if there is someone inside and I press F, I'm more exposed than if before I jump out, I press Q and then F, and now I have the cover of the vehicle. So there are many reasons to have really good keybinds for seat swapping that you're able to do really quickly. And I find these specific ones work the best for me personally. Okay, so 2 more important keybinds are jump and vault. If you have jump and vault bound to the same key, you're going to run into a few issues, which I'm going to demonstrate shortly. But obviously I have jump bound to space, which is down as jump only, and I have vault only bound to V, which again is next to my C key. So all of my keys to do with movement are really close together. The reason you want to separate jump and vault is because of situations like this, where if there was a guy just below this wall here and you're on top of a building, you can't see behind the wall, right? You want to be able to jump on top of the wall and lean to shoot the guy and then be able to go back onto the building without accidentally just vaulting off, which is what will happen if you stood next to the wall and you have jump and vault bound to the same key. I just have it on V for easy access because, like I said, it's next to my C key, which I'm going to be spamming quite a lot. So if I come up to a wall or something, it's just really easy to press. But the main thing here is that you just separate jump and vault so that you can jump up on ledges like this without accidentally vaulting over. Before I get on to this next part, there is actually one crucial thing I need to mention, and that is that I play with my keyboard almost vertical on the desk. This actually comes from something I picked up from other PUBG players in the early days of PUBG, where many players recommended having your keyboard at least a 45-degree angle. This is something that I believe comes from previous esports scenes before PUBG, things like StarCraft. And the idea of having your keyboard at such an angle is that you can have all your fingers basically around WASD and the keys close to that. But by having your keyboard at an angle, it frees up your thumb in such a way that your thumb can actually be used to press keys all the way on the right hand side of the keyboard in a way that would be really difficult to stretch and do if your keyboard was completely horizontal. This is obviously going to depend on everyone's different hand size and stuff, but generally just the natural way that your hand sits, you are going to be able to reach further on a keyboard if it's at an angle rather than being placed completely horizontally on the desk. My personal case is quite extreme, because I would say that my keyboard is probably at something like a 70 or 80-degree angle, but this has been a gradual process for me, and I originally started with my keyboard barely being at 45 degrees, and just naturally, as I have gotten more used to this sort of vert keyboard setup on my desk, I have found myself becoming more comfortable with it becoming more and more vertical. So this isn't something I necessarily recommend to everyone, but I do recommend tilting your keyboard and just seeing if you feel like your thumb can reach the other side of the keyboard without moving your fingers off WASD easier by tilting it. And then I would recommend, if you feel like it's easier, try tilting it more. Is it even easier, or is there a point where it becomes more difficult? And this is how I would recommend you find the sweet spot. The reason I mention this is because I actually have a load of keybinds in the game that are really based around never taking my fingers off WASD, but using my thumb whilst using WASD to perform other functions. So I actually have the inventory bound to Y on the keyboard, and I do this with my thumb, which allows me to keep all of my other fingers occupied. I can have my little finger on shift and all my fingers on WASD, and still be using my index finger to randomly press F, but I can still just use my thumb, open my inventory, quickly drag some things in. You know, I just find that this really helps with looting, but again, it's very dependent on my specific keyboard setup. I also have the map on U, which is right next to Y on the keyboard. So I have this for the exact same reasons. When I am running around and looting, my thumb normally rests on Y and or U, and then my palm is actually sitting on the space bar, ready to just trigger jump with the space. And then as soon as I'm in a fight, I turn my hand just a little bit and my thumb is now on crouch after rotating my hand slightly clockwise. And so the way I play, this is something that took a little while to get used to, but I feel like this works for me so well. But I essentially am alternating between two hand positions on the keyboard, one with my thumb on Y and my palm on space, and one with my thumb on C and my thumb knuckle on space, depending on whether I'm looting or whether I'm in combat or whether I'm checking the map or whether I'm in combat. Again, this may not be for everyone, but this has really contributed to me having a very comfortable sitting position at the desk, which is a topic for a whole other video. But I personally feel like having my keyboard at this angle allows me to have a more comfortable sitting position as well, where my left elbow is fully on the desk. Again, this is a topic for a whole other video, but this all contributes to several keybinds that are slightly less important. So many of the keybinds from here on out are really assigned in such a way for me to press them with the thumb, and are also therefore bound in such a way that it's less likely for me to press them by accident. One last thing I want to note about having these two different positions for my keyboard hand and the vert keyboard setup is that at one point in time, when I was slightly newer to PUBG, it was actually a huge issue for me to accidentally bring up the map or accidentally bring up the inventory because of my keybinds and my keyboard position by essentially alternating between two different positions with my left hand. If I'm in combat, when my thumb is sitting on C and jump, there is absolutely zero possibility of me accidentally bringing up the inventory by pressing tab, which was a problem with me in the early days of PUBG. And so when I know that things are safe for looting or checking the map, that is when I change keyboard position to my thumb to be sat on Y. In my opinion, accidentally pressing a button that's going to make you un-ADS or pressing a button that's going to bring up some kind of menu that obscures your view is always something potentially fatal if done at the wrong time. So with keybinds, I try and avoid all of this. For throwables, I have all the throwables that are available on basically every map assigned to separate keys. So G is my grenades, H is my mollies, J is my stuns, and K is my smokes. And for other throwables like sticky bombs that aren't on every map, or for C4s which you're not going to use very often, or the same thing applies for spike traps, because you don't have to use them a lot, I just go in the inventory, right click it, and then I'll just press 5, which is the throwable slot, to actually equip it. Again, there's only so many keys on the keyboard, so I feel like when it comes to throwables, I have all the essentials bound just fine. So for these sort of more rarer items that you're not going to use all the time, I think it's fine to not just have a hotkey personally. I will say though, that when it comes to mollies and stuns, even though I have a separate bind for them, I don't really have muscle memory for this yet. I totally have muscle memory for pressing G for nades and K for smokes, which again, I'm pressing with my thumb. But even though I have my molly and my stun bind, I sometimes use this bind, but sometimes I also just go in the inventory and right click, or just press the throwables button to cycle between them. It really just depends in the spur of the moment which one I just decide to do first. Sometimes I'm paranoid about pressing the wrong throwables button, so I'll just use the inventory. But even for me, who has about 4,000 hours in PUBG now, I feel like I'm still building muscle memory for certain things in the game that you don't necessarily do all the time. And this will probably change for me over time as I get used to keybinds for mollies and stuns, and this might change for you as well. Like I said at the start of this video, keybinds shouldn't really be set in stone unless you feel 100% comfortable, but if you play a lot, I feel like I learn almost every day when I play PUBG, and sometimes just a different keybind feels better. I also have separate keybinds for all meds. So for my throwables, you might have noticed that they all follow the same line on the keyboard. So it's from G to K, just one straight line of buttons to press with my thumb. I think of this kind of like a hotbar in an MMO. So my top line is throwables. And then from B all the way to /, I have meds on the bar below. So B is for bandage, N is actually for energy, M is for first aids, comma is for painkillers, full stop is for medkit, and / is for adrenaline syringe. Personally, I do actually use these dedicated binds for heals all the time, particularly if I think there is an enemy close, or I know there is an enemy close and I want to be able to heal but still constantly watch to see if somebody peeks. I actually feel like separate binds for heals is more important than separate binds for throwables. But again, I think I just have more muscle memory and I'm just more used to these dedicated keys for heals than I am for all the throwables, because you use meds in every single game. Okay, so the last keybinds I actually want to mention are to do with driving two-seater bikes. I have the tilt forward or front flip button bound to my left click, and I have my lean back button or back flip bound to right click. So you can see here under motorcycle in keybinds, got lean back, right click, lean forward, left click. I also have lean right bound to V and lean left bound to C. And the reason for this is just that when it comes to using V and C, my thumb is probably already sitting on the C key when I'm in a vehicle anyway. So it's just easy access if I quickly need to correct. Something to note about using left and right click for this is because you're driving, you can't shoot, obviously. So left and right click are actually always free when you're driving a vehicle. And this is something that many players forget. So there's zero reason why you can't use left and right click for any keybind while driving, and leaning forwards and backwards are such a crucial part of not falling off a two-seater. I just find it extremely important to have a lot of control over pressing these buttons. And this is honestly one of my favorite current keybinds, because there's almost no two buttons that you have access to they have more control over other than left and right click. Alright guys, that's going to do it for this one. I hope you found this video useful. If you want to support the content, make sure you leave a like and a comment because this really helps the YouTube algorithm. Subscribe for future content, and until next time, I'll see you on stream or in the comments. Have a good one.